Good morning, Pilgrim Church. None of us expected we'd be meeting like this today, but here we are. I hope you're safe, warm, and at least trying to enjoy all of that snow outside. Both Pastor Dan and I have a few thoughts to share with you this morning, along with songs that have meant something to us in recent days or months. Like I explained in the email, please hit the links in the order that they're listed there for today's worship experience. I would like to begin by reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 40, verses 34 to 38. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Through all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the sons of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out until the day that it was. For throughout all their journeys, the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and there was fire in it by night, in the sight of all of the house of Israel. Second, from the book of 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 15 through 17. Everything comes from you, O God, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. We are but sojourners in your sight, and our days on earth are but a shadow. For I know that you try the heart. And finally, from the book of Leviticus 25, verse 23. For you are aliens and sojourners with me. As a transitional minister, for years I've been drawn to the identification of a sojourner. To sojourn is to stay briefly or temporarily in one place, and a sojourner is one who takes up residence somewhere, but only for a brief period of time. Now, the operative word here, however, is brief. And while the immediate focus of both terms is on the staying, the implication seems to be that it is a momentary stop on a much longer trip, shifting the greater sense of the word to the journey rather than the residential stay. For nearly 300 years, Pilgrim Church has set up camp in Leominster, basically, building up yourselves in love and networking and marking your place in this community in many ways, as the cloud of God landed here and remained, just as it did in the days of Israel's departure from Egypt on their journey to the promised land. You have not been travelers during that time. You've been settlers, as God was calling you to be, and investing yourselves in each other and in growing in God together ever since. But if there was ever a time to feel as though we are not at all settled, it would be the past 2 years. With all its successes and challenges, the complete upending of spiritual, social, and economic life from a worldwide pandemic, and the beginning of a search for your next minister. With all of these things, we are really hard-pressed to not feel as though we are anything but settled. We have become sojourners as a community of faith, plain and simple. The cloud lifted with practically no warning, just like it did in the days of Israel. And we have made adjustments and figuratively packed up and began following it with new directions for us to pursue, a new journey to embark upon. The residence that you have taken up regarding how we do church has become the place that we have begun to leave and sojourn from, to discover where God is going to lead you next. And the realization hits us that you just may be called to be sojourners for the foreseeable future, marked by a new destination and fulfilling the next chapter of your life. We've talked about it before, and we will talk more about it again next Sunday during our annual meeting worship service. But there's another aspect of this, of being a sojourner, that I want to highlight this morning. It's the individual plight, the individual journey. We all find ourselves in those moments as well. King David said in his prayer in 1 Chronicles that we opened with, in which he was consecrating the permanent temple that his son Solomon was to build, he wrapped up his prayer by saying this, "For we are strangers and sojourners in your sight, O Lord, and our days on earth are but a shadow." I find it interesting that this reference seems to be the culminating dedication of what turns out to be the second offering of the masses in the Hebrew Scriptures, where the entire nation of Israel is presented the challenge to either provide or become the resources necessary to raise a new temple for the worship of God. Moses was the first to do this, and with a remarkable response, and David the second, with one pretty much equally remarkable. In fact, the words around the sojourner reference in this passage give clear mention of this. He says, "But who are we that we should be able to give as generously as we have? Everything that we have given comes from you, and we've given only what comes from your hand. We are but sojourners in your sight." What I find interesting is that this was one of the few moments in the Old Testament where the writer is speaking about the individual sacrifice of those present, what they needed to and felt compelled by their own hearts to give. This is not only a moment for the whole community. David is referencing the private moments between giver and receiver, between man and God, and acknowledging that the sacrifices these people made have rendered them, in some ways, sojourners. Now, just as a disclaimer, this is not another message about giving or stewardship, so stay with me here for a moment. There was a much deeper point to be inferred by this story. The brevity of life, of met expectations, and of things that are familiar struck home with all of Israel when they realized, not just collectively, but individually and privately, that what they thought was their home is no longer, and that God had something new for them to experience. Immanuel Kant, 18th century philosopher and economist, wrote a treatise on moral philosophy, one of his conclusions being that it is immoral for a person to treat another person as a means to an end. And we can all pretty much agree with that. In providing examples for his point, he mentioned the social contract between real estate owners, or landlords, and their tenants, or renters. And in an obvious attempt to equalize the two by way of a rather logical surmise, he noted that, in the end, we are all renters. It's in the same vein that both God and King David make the point that in the end, in the grander scheme of things, we are all sojourners. Nothing is permanent. We live our lives briefly, temporarily, hoping against hope that they are worth something, that they will amount to something lasting in the end. And it is to this sentiment that I am drawn to speak to you about today. We all feel from time to time this sense of disconnect from life and from our hopes, from what is comfortable. It's painful, but it's natural, and it's human. These are the times of some of our greatest trials in life, when our whole sense of normalcy is uprooted, the proverbial rugs pulled out from under us, shown to be quite temporary after all, and nothing that we can rely on any longer. We must, in those times, find a new anchor, a stronger one, an anchor that is more lasting than simply what is familiar. David concludes his remarks by saying this, I know, O God, that you try the heart. God tries and tests our hearts, not to discover something he didn't know, but to stretch and strengthen and expand their capacity. Like gold is tested in fire, another psalmist puts it. All the things you are currently struggling with, all the interruptions in what you think would be a kinder, easier year or life, become subject to God's pruning in order to bring even more life from them. We are all on that common quest, as David puts it, to endure the testing of our hearts by God through whatever journey he puts us on and whatever trials we encounter along the way. But the beauty of these moments can be found in the words from God himself. And of all the obscure places, it's in the book of Leviticus, a book that almost none of us as clergy actually study. But they offer reprieve and hope. God says in the passage I read earlier, for you are sojourners with me. There is nothing, no journey, no interruption in life that God is making you walk alone. We are sojourning with him. In fact, this promise from God actually suggests that God is going through something similar, an upheaval, some unexpected turns in the road, and a journey to unknown places. Certainly, he ultimately knows where he and we are going. But the idea that he shares your sense of uncertainty, that he understands your angst and anxiety, that has the capacity to be overwhelmingly comforting. At a time when we as a congregation are taking up the challenge to both walk in new ideas and explore new expressions of living church, taking up the charge to follow the cloud of God's presence as it moves in new directions in our own lives is just as challenging and can also be just as rewarding. Would you pray with me? Dear God, strengthen and gird up our hearts in those moments where they are weighed down, when they're perplexed or struggling to see you in our circumstances. Hold us up with your hand, surround us, encase us, embrace us. Make us aware of just how close you are to us and how you are orchestrating all of what we are going through for our betterment and for our growth and for the benefit of our journey. Amen. Now, as we close this portion, before Pastor Dan comes on, please hit the next link in your email and join me in listening to the song Weary Traveler by Jordan St. Cyr. Have a blessed day.